All right, hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name's Kelly Rembert. I'm the Outreach Librarian at the Southfield Library. So we're excited you joined us for this evening's program. Just some basic housekeeping rules that, feel free to come in, come out. If there's background noises, I think there is behind me at the moment, that happens. We're doing this from home, wherever you're at the moment. So it's all good. So feel free if you have a question to ask it, and to ask it right away. And so right now, it is going to be, you didn't come here to hear me talk, but if you have any questions about the library, I am here for that. But right now, it is my pleasure to turn this over to Esshaki. She's a Chaldean-American poet and performer who's from Southfield. She holds a Master of the Arts from Eastern Michigan University, a Bachelor of the Arts from Wayne State. She's going to be reading to us today and talking to us about her book, Kaldani, which gives us an idea of how the genocide and diaspora have altered the identities of Chaldeans while they strive to hold on to their traditions and culture. So I'm excited to hear her I'm excited to hear her speak some of these poems to us and hear more about the book and the process it took to get here. So now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Anne.
Hi, everyone. First, I'd like to thank you all for joining me on this nice, beautiful Wednesday evening at 5 p.m. I'm sure most of you are just rushing off of your computers from work. So I really appreciate you guys getting here and joining me. So just a little bit about me, about my background. I was born and raised in Southfield. I went to Southfield Public Schools. For as long as I can remember, I was that student that gave poems to their English teacher and begged them to read it. Because when I was in school, you probably had like one day dedicated to poetry in an English class. But I was just always writing. I loved to rhyme. I loved words. I loved putting them together, making images. And it was fun. It was fun. It was meditative, and it always stuck with me. But never when I was younger did I think to myself, I'm going to grow up and be a poet. But I knew that I was always going to write. I just didn't see myself doing that as a career. Not until I got over to Wayne State, which is where I did my bachelor's. When I first enrolled, I was enrolled as a chem major, and I had this, I guess you can call him like a counselor, like an advisor. And, they asked me, why are you majoring in chem? And I said, well, I want to go to medical school. And they're like, you don't have to major in chemistry to go to medical school. You can literally major in anything you want to major in. And I was like, really? Make it English. So literally the next semester I took 4 English classes. I almost died. But it was worth it. I figured out pretty quickly that I wanted to form a career out of writing. So that's what I started to do. And after I graduated, I took about a year off and I went over to Eastern, and I met so many amazing writers. I got to study under some phenomenal professors. And I would say it definitely took my craft to the next level. That's where I started to form Kaldani. And the roots that I had for this book were already in place. Growing up, I always would Google Chaldeans, because I knew that I was Chaldean. I knew that we were very religious. I knew that we had our own language, that we had our own traditions and foods, because we practiced those yearly. Sometimes, we have things that we do daily that are very traditional to our culture. And I wanted to know more. So I started Googling whatever I could find. I would just, soak it up. But still, I would find myself often explaining to people what it means to be Chaldean. And there is a priest, also a writer, named Father Michael Bezzi, and he's the author of numerous books. And I recently watched a recording that he had done. It was an interview he had done with a woman named Wiam Namuyatuma. She's the director of the Chaldean-American Museum. And in this interview, he had the same conflict. Like, people were also coming to him and asking him all these questions about, what life is like in Telkepe, what it means to be Chaldean. So he said, why don't I just write a book? Right. So I kind of had the same experience. It's, people are constantly asking me, what does it mean to be Chaldean? Who are you? Where are you from? Where are you people from? What kind of language is that? So I thought to myself, I should definitely put that down in poetry because that's where my roots were at. And another part of my background that is huge in this book is I was able to learn how to read and write Chaldean at my church at a young age at Mother of God. I believe I began when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And I went and I learned with my mother and my grandmother, and it just stuck with me. It was something that I never forgot. Of course, we were speaking Chaldean in the home, so that helped. I was speaking it before I was reading and writing it. And, once I got to the graduate program, I thought to myself, I need to do something. I need to preserve my culture and my history and my identity in some way. I'm not a big essay writer, so I knew that I wasn't going to write a history book, but I knew that as a creative writer, I could put together something that would give people a sense of who I am, but also do it in a form that I know is true to who I am as well. So putting it into poetry and having something like this is literally like my heart walking outside of my body, right? It's like, it's so close to me to be able to preserve that. And to have something out there that I know is teaching others about my history and about my culture. So just a little brief history lesson, about Chaldeans. We come from what is modern day Iraq, which was Mesopotamia and the Nineveh Plains. So if you hear about the Ishtar Gates, Babylon, the Hanging Gardens, these are all things that are associated with Chaldean identity. And there's so much historically that I learned, later just because of doing the research that I didn't even know had anything to do with Chaldeans. There's a lot of contribution that Chaldeans have made to architecture, to mathematics, to astronomy. And knowing these things just empowered me, it gave me the fuel that I needed to begin to write Kaldani. Also at Wayne State, I did and I performed a lot of spoken word poetry. I knew that my words weren't just meant for the page, that my words were meant to be performed and expressed so that people could not just hear them, but see them. And that's what I enjoy so much about spoken word poetry is that you can see the feelings that go behind the words. So I began performing at a place called the Old Miami, which the night was ran by a group called 5E Gallery. And I would go every Tuesday night. It was a women in hip hop's night, and I never missed it because that was my practice. That was where I knew where it was going to, in a sense, begin for me. And I felt most comfortable. I loved the feeling of performing. I loved the way that people would interact. And I knew that when I was on that stage that I was making an impact. So there is a huge part of me that began in the spoken word area, like I guess you could say in that arena. So I would like to perform a few spoken word pieces just to kind of get things warmed up for everyone and just get into the poetry because I'm sure you're tired of hearing me speak for a little bit. So this is just a bit of a warm-up piece that I often do. And it says a lot about me as a writer and just as a person. I mentioned from the get-go he would have to clear my vision. I was lost so deep within to where the walls are paper thin. I heard him calling in the darkness, and with the little strength I had, I opened up my eyes and saw the light to lead me back. I heard the church bells ringing and the jungle came around, a pair of every living thing, all lost and newly found. How sweet it was to hear the sound of love disperse into the air. And now I know deep in my heart that life is really not fair. But I won't take it there because I have to focus on the positive. My prerogative is the way we all live, to receive and always give, to protect each and every kid, to show them that love is the swirl behind the turning of this world. And I know exactly what to do. When they speak hate on me and you, return that hate with love, for they know not what they do, for they know not what they do, for they know not what that love is, that love for me and you. So that is one of my spoken word pieces. And I just like to open up the room for anyone who would like to ask a question, maybe about my background of spoken word poetry, maybe a question about Chaldean history or Chaldean culture that they would like to ask. So if there's anyone who has a question, you could either type it in the chat and I can answer it, or you can ask it through the microphone. So just give you guys a couple of seconds or minutes, a minute. I don't know how long. We'll see.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. So hello. Yeah. So just to let you know, I actually found out about this. I'm on here from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, through Google when the Pope was visiting Iraq, and I had Googled Chaldeans, and this is how that came up. So
Oh, wow.
yeah. But
Welcome.
thank you. And part of my interest, I guess, in all of this is I have a huge interest in especially Middle Eastern Christianity, and I had backpacked through the southern part of Turkey, where a lot of Chaldean and Assyrian churches, and seeing, with Aramaic inscriptions is just, yeah, it's a mind-blowing culture, and I like what you're doing here. And I'm just kind of curious about that too. When I travel through there, what is the main difference to say between an Assyrian and a Chaldean? Is it more the Assyrians are Orthodox, Chaldeans are Catholic? I guess that's my somewhat understanding of, say, the difference.
Right. So yeah, this is a common historical question throughout time is what is the difference between Assyrians and Chaldeans? Because so there was a shift that happened in the church, and I can't give you sources right now, but there is a lot on the internet and Google and scholars who have searched this, but there was a shift that happened in the church, basically where there was a Chaldean bishop who, I think at the time, the patriarch of the church was given to the nephew of the patriarch at the time, and that's how the Assyrian church would do it. Well, this particular patriarch didn't have a nephew, so this kind of left the position open, and then that's where this Chaldean priest came in, and this is where this split in a sense kind of happened. But these are two separate groups that were at one point together, and they were together because of the religion. However, once that divide happened with the religion, there was more, you saw more of a split between these two groups, the Assyrian and Chaldeans. However, historically, they are two separate groups, and it mainly is the religion, the Orthodox, whereas Chaldeans are Eastern Catholic, right? And we have our own patriarch. So I hope that kind of gives you a little bit.
Yeah, and the language is very similar, right? The Aramaic is the language, correct? Like, is it a common Aramaic dialect?
Right. So Chaldean is a dialect of Aramaic. But it is its own language. There are differences between the Aramaic that the Assyrians speak and the Aramaic that the Chaldeans speak. However, they are all Aramaic.
Great.
Yeah.
And I see in the chat, we've got a couple questions from Amber, so I'm going to read them for you. What is the biggest misconception about the Chaldean culture that you've heard, and what is your response to that misconception?
I don't know. This one is pretty tough, I guess. See, I grew up in the era of when I was really young when 9/11 happened, but I remember the switch into how people who were Middle Eastern began to be treated after, like post 9/11. And I think one of the major things that me, myself, but also other Chaldeans around me were having trouble grappling was that everyone was associating anyone who was Middle Eastern with being Muslim or following Islam. And that's a huge misconception for us because we're extremely Christian, Catholic. And to have someone label you as something other, especially when the religion is held so dear to the identity. I mean, being Catholic is really what makes Chaldeans Chaldean, right? It's that they were following the words of Christ, and to have someone label you differently than that was really hard for Chaldeans, because they didn't, of course, want to be associated with something that was looked upon so negatively, especially when they are such a large group of people of love. You know, their arms are constantly open, they're constantly giving, and that's what the culture has always been. It's very huge, family oriented, very welcoming. So I think that might be a misconception with it, is that maybe Chaldeans aren't as welcoming as people think they are, or maybe there might be a hesitation to that group, especially post 9/11. Yeah, I see another question in there. That what are some traditional Chaldean celebrations that are still celebrated today? So one celebration, actually, it was just recently celebrated. It's how we start off Lent. So a couple of weeks before Lent begins, we do a 3-day fast. It's called Beutha. And this is something that has gone back thousands of years, something that we celebrate and fast. So that's one event. And you can look it up on Google and read more about Beutha. It's Baootha. But this is definitely one thing in particular that is very strict to like Chaldean identity. Okay, and there's one more question. I think this will be the last one, and then we'll go on to some more poetry. Seeing that you grew up speaking Chaldean language in your home, has this impacted how you construct your poetry in respect to Kaldani? So 100%. The fact that I grew up speaking Chaldean before I even learned English, I think has a lot to do with my sentence structure. Oftentimes when I speak, I'll be trying to get out, you know, what I want to say, but because I'm thinking from like the right side of the page, and because I'm thinking of the action and then the noun, there's a lot that I'm trying to get out that maybe if English had been my first language, it would be more clear. Or even like sometimes there was words that I had no idea what the English word was for it, and I just would try to figure it out. But in terms of Kaldani, there are portions of the book that I wrote out the sound of how the word is, as opposed to writing it in Chaldean. But I wrote out the sound. So like there's one part where it says Hayu Brati, and this means come here, my daughter. And I thought it was really important that I incorporated Chaldean language into the book, because I wanted people to be able to hear it and know how it sounded, even though they can't read Chaldean. So it definitely impacted the way that not just the poetry is constructed, but the way my thoughts are constructed in general, but in a good way, for sure. So here we are with Kaldani, and wow, this took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, a lot of time, and a lot of research that went into putting this together. I was going around the community and speaking with the different people who are involved to kind of get a sense of, to them, what it meant to be Chaldean. Of course, I was asking family and friends and cousins and getting them to tell me stories about back home, or tell me stories maybe about what their grandparents might have told them about what life was like before the Chaldeans came to Metro Detroit, or even tell me about why they felt like they had to leave Iraq. And that's how we got into the genocide and diaspora aspect of Kaldani. Briefly, before we get into any other poetry, I just want to mention that there are 2 other books that are going to come out. So this is a 3-part series. And the next book is going to be about culture and traditions. And then the book after that will be about marriage and religion. So that way there's more out there for you to understand really what it's like to be Chaldeans, as opposed to just focusing on the genocide and diaspora aspect of it, even though that is a huge part of our identity now in the US. So I'm still working on those. I don't have a release date for you yet, but they will be coming out. So I'm just going to read from the book a little bit, and I hope that you all enjoy how I believe it should sound on the page. Thanks be to God first and foremost. Thank you to my parents, brothers, and sister-in-laws. Thanks to my professors at EMU, especially my advisor, Christine Hume, for her time, energy, advice, and long-lasting impact. A special thank you to Ariel Harris for her love and dedication. And lastly, thank you to my muse and my best friend, Jessica Ali, for believing in the homie. So here we are with Genocide and Diaspora. And I put this quote in here: God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. This is something that's always resonated with me in terms of trying to figure out who I am as a Chaldean-American. All right. So the first poem I'll read is called Headlines. I asked a white woman if she heard of the genocide in Iraq. Are you sure? She asked. Am I sure? Of what? That the Christians face persecution by ISIL? I'm sure 80% of Iraqi Christian population disappears from Iraq post Saddam Hussein. What does that mean? It means we cried when they hung him. We knew our own extinction would follow. Is this the end of Christianity in the Middle East? I said, the Christian mothers threw their children from the mountains to prevent capture by ISIS. She paused for a split second. Are you sure? That seems unreal. So I just want to point out how the poem looks on the page here. And if you can see, there are portions where it is italicized, or maybe it's in quotations, because this poem was constructed actually taking headlines or quotes directly from articles and constructing this poem. Because oftentimes when I would speak with people, they had no idea, absolutely no idea that genocide is happening in Iraq to Christians. And it was just baffling to me because of how much it impacted me and my community, that people just weren't aware of it. So I decided that to construct a poem with these headlines would definitely say something and have an impact on people, because then you can literally Google these italicized or quoted remarks, and the article will come up. So that way you can read more about the genocide that's happening in Iraq. This next piece is called Fake News. Some news in the US captures an exposure of indulgent horrors, masking the current genocide in the Middle East. A brandished light of barbaric stories, terrorism brands the skin of martyrs. The desert transforms the deserted, an underground system of freedom, a step away from dehydration, praying that these trials and tribulations surpass. Face to face with terrorist hands that handle AK-47s and jab knives into their bodies, and they are welcomed into freedom by fitting the description. So to go back on what I was speaking in terms of post 9/11, of how everyone who was Middle Eastern was just viewed as someone who was a terrorist, or someone who was going to harm them, or someone who was just bad. This piece is a response to that. Is like, look at everything that this group of people is going through. And then when they finally get to a place where they should be free and comfortable, now they're brandished as the terrorists, as fitting of the same people that are oppressing them, right? Which is just mind-blowing to think about. Here's a little lighter one. Stereotypical jargon. Chaldean women don't all drive brand new Jeeps. Chaldean women are loyal. Chaldean girls are told they will be a doctor and lawyer even after they decide they won't be. Some Chaldean girls do become lawyers and then start organizations such as Code Legal Aid and help aid families with their legal battles to prevent deportation. Being stuck up has nothing to do with being Chaldean. A Chaldean woman sacrificed her life for her child. A Chaldean woman, a pharmacist, travels with supplies to refugee camps in Iraq and surrounding countries to aid people in need. Chaldean women do not have limits when it comes to any child. There are so many Chaldean nurses that we've stopped paying attention. Some Chaldean girls grow up to become Chaldean mothers. Chaldean women get breast cancer, smile through their chemo, and still cook dinner for their kids. Chaldean women gave birth with midwives at home naturally. Chaldean girls can be loud and sassy and talk back. They get this from their moms who don't take crap from anyone. Chaldean women date outside their race. Chaldean women are afraid to date outside their race. Chaldean girls play hockey. Chaldean girls start organizations such as Peter's Angels. Chaldean women own hair and nail salons. Chaldean women sent in recipes to make a Chaldean cookbook, and it's better than gold. Chaldean women own real estate. Chaldean women are some of the best seamstresses. Chaldean women are the personification of strength. A Chaldean woman discovered the Flint water crisis. Baking bread. This is one of my favorite poems from Kaldani. This is an actual memory that I have with my grandmother and my mother. So that's why, I guess that's why I really enjoy it. The smell of its freshness seeps through the basement door. Hayu brati, come here, my daughter. Stay on sotach. Go help your grandmother. Your perfume, your Chloe, a simulating scent of your hard work. In front of the stove, a wooden round table, 6 inches from the ground. Your feet wrapped around its base, your hands on the thin rolling pin, rolling until the dough is transparent. Transparency is the way you told me about your grandmother with each roll of your pin, about how she created the fire in the brick oven, about how she and you and your sister and your mom would work together to bake a week worth of bread, about how much preparation it took making the bread, mixing it the day before, and having the patience for it to rest, coming back the next day and continuing as if you never stopped, tirelessly rolling and cooking and preserving. Transparency is knowing that you preserved her and her and her and you and me and bread. So yeah, I remember being in my grandmother's basement, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with this Middle Eastern style of bread that if you just tap it, it like shatters into a million pieces. So we would make this bread in the basement. And of course, I was young, so I wasn't actually rolling any dough. I wasn't touching the fire, but my job was to carry the freshly cooked, very delicate bread up 18 steps and make sure that I didn't drop it. Because if I dropped it, then all that hard work was for nothing. So I think I had the most important job. You know, I had to make sure. Yes, and my cousin commented, the most narrow steps. They were very, very narrow steps. And yes, that was my job. And it was really important that my grandmother made sure she told me every single time that I would take a batch up, don't drop them. Don't trip, watch where you're going, don't fall. But it was just a really nice memory to be able to learn how to bake this bread from scratch. And then, of course, the story times that I would get during these moments, those are just irreplaceable. So this next poem I'm going to read is called Mabasima, and it is an ode to the Mabasima cookbook that is out, where the Chaldean-American Ladies of Charity asked a lot of women in the community to send in their recipes, and they created this cookbook called Mabasima, and on each page where the recipe is there, whoever's recipe it is, their name is under the recipe, which I thought was really, really beautiful of them to do. And like the book itself, if you're interested in cooking Chaldean cuisine, go on Amazon, search Mabasima, that's M-A, and then B-A-S-E-E-M-A. You will love it. I have one of my own. It's wonderful. Her gaze intuitive tunes to her mother's intuition, demonstrating techniques to sew tripe into pouches, then stuff it with hushu and sew it shut. Memorized by hands that have touched tripe for decades. But how do you know if you put enough baharat? Watch and you will know. The recipes of her ancestry, once oral churned prints, so delicious that the page smells. Still, with the luxury of the written, oral remnants sift through her mom's Sunday morning when she asks again, but how do you know if you put enough baharat? So baharat is, it's the word, Chaldean word for allspice. And this is a very, very common spice that we put in a lot of our food. So me asking, well, how do you know if you put how much baharat? Because when you learn from your mom how to cook, there are no measuring cups. It's literally like you shake it this like this, or you put it in your hand like this, and then you throw it on the food. And that's how they measure. So, the question of how do you know how much, right? Because you have to just watch. That's how they learned to cook. They didn't write anything down. I mean, Mabasima is probably our first cookbook that we know of. I'm sure maybe something out there exists that just hasn't been put into print yet, but it's really beautiful to think about. All this is memorized. It's memorized in their minds, but also their bodies and their hands. They could do it without even thinking. So if anybody has any comments and they want to say something about a poem, or you can do that now as well.
I'm going to read a comment that came from Ari, and she commented that it was very emotional and soulful work, sorry.
Thank you.
I really liked it.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that's so sweet. We have young viewers. Okay, so I will read another poem. It's called Blood Money. Peaceful people drown in an ocean of oil and artifacts, where the ancient history of Sennacherib is buried by the ancient history of Nebi Yunus. Artifacts stolen then preserved by sale. The black market profits, killing those who visit and maintain these shrines. Museums and artifacts, remnants of the first empire, destroyed in the name of Islamic traditions. Still, the hands of micropoets resurrect this preservation because Lamasu is in London. Ancestral bones scatter a decaying society. My dreams grow stronger as my family is buried, and these dreams remain the same, despite the lead, the nickel, and the dinar. We knew after his public hanging that Iraqi Christians questioned their safety, and then ISIS dug up graves, bulldozing dreams into a pile of eroding limbs, deteriorating identity, a failing attempt to make an ancient civilization disappear. And even though we came back to mass graves, as we bury and pray over each body, we ask for your forgiveness. Then we rebuild. So just briefly, the thought behind writing this poem is that there are a lot of martyrs throughout Chaldean history, because religion is such a huge part of Chaldean identity. People are willing to die for that. So this particular piece was something that I wanted to write to point out that even though there's still a lot of anger and what happened to the Chaldean people and what happened to our history and it being bulldozed, and I can only imagine the feelings that people had of their loved ones' graves being dug up. Even throughout all that, we ask for your forgiveness, right? We pray for those who have done this to us, and then we continue on. So that's something that I really wanted to point out, is that as much as throughout time, especially as Chaldeans have faced genocides, they have always worked past it. They have always forgiven and then moved on, because that's how you preserve. That's how you keep going forward. And that's something that I think Chaldean identity really encompasses and understands, if that's what's needed to do. But it's also a survival tactic that throughout time it's formed their identity. So this next piece I'm going to read was a story that my sister-in-law's father told me. And this happened to his mother. A castaway. His mother threw him out a window to save his life, the life they came to take in exchange for his father's. Each swing of the knife followed by a command, "Tell us where he is." His father dreams of a better life, and his mother endures its scars, her scars. Lacerations breathing on her chest, jagged cuts replacing her nipples, her weakened eyes unable to focus but able to raise 15 kids that raise each other, help her, and help each other. With pride, her eyes bruise silence, praying that they did not find him. A woman finds him in the haystack, wraps him in her dishdasha, and nurses him to health. So this was a particular story that I was told. So my sister-in-law's father's father was involved in a group that basically did not agree with how the government was treating the people at the time. So they were sought after, and this particular day they were looking for him. So his mother knew that this was her only son and that they would want to take her son if they couldn't get to her husband. So when they came, she threw him out the window onto a pile of haystacks and just prayed that they didn't know he existed, that this was her child. And they beat her and they slashed her chest and they were torturing her to try and find out where her husband was. And she passed out, of course, from the pain. And when she woke up, I guess one of the neighbors had seen the baby being thrown out the window and took the baby and took it home. And like, she knew that this was her child, and just helped keep the baby alive until she could get the baby back to her. So that was just hearing it and knowing that that was him, that, he couldn't, there was a chance that he probably wouldn't even made it here, right? There was a chance that my sister-in-law wouldn't even been my sister-in-law. And to have something like that happen is just, it's a lot of torture and torment and death that has happened throughout Chaldean identity, which is another reason why I felt like it had to be preserved, like it had to be talked about. As hard as it is, it's something that people should be made aware of. So I'm going to read a couple of more. Dead language. This language cannot die, must not die. Why did she have to die? Why can't this school understand? I'm trying. I fled my home with barely anything and lived in refugee camps with nothing to nourish my mind or body. No, Yuma did not make it. She, like Jesus, sacrificed her life for me. I can't think past the moment of my mother's passing. My friends and I cannot read these books, so we crack jokes in the back of class. We may not know English, but we know about having resources. It's not my fault that you don't speak my language. Aftershock. Standing behind a counter in the same spot, missteps are not missteps. Her father misses dinner most evenings, never able to attend birthdays or recitals, guesses his children's age. Customers yell at him, "Go back home," back where he came from. They comment on his clothes and car, 18-hour days, no paid vacations or holidays. His body aches to walk, to see, to stop and speak with neighbors, eat seeds and drink chai, one hand behind his back, twiddling beads, silently praying. "Wake up, man. I need a pack of Newports, short, box." So that is, I guess, a glimpse into the life of a Chaldean father. So when Chaldeans first started to come to the US, of course, it was Henry Ford's $5 a day that was really enticing. But it was also the entrepreneurial spirit behind Chaldeans. They have always been merchants, and they knew that there was going to be a community here that they could provide goods to. So they started to open up mom and pop shops all throughout Detroit. And even after the riots, Chaldeans stayed, and they kept providing the grocery stores and liquor stores in these areas and running these liquor stores and putting in 18 to 19-hour days so that their wife and kids had a decent life. So this is a story about the sacrifices of a Chaldean father for his family, but also how he misses what his life was once before the genocide and the diaspora that started to happen in Iraq. Okay, this next piece is called Detroit versus El Kush. El Kush is one of the villages that Chaldeans lived in Iraq. There was also Telkepe, and El Kush, Telkepe, and I think now I'm gonna butcher the pronouncing, but Garwama, there's Chaldeans living there. So Detroit versus El Kush. My son Snapchats at the dinner table, does this W with his hands. I can't figure out why he keeps yelling West Side till I die. I fled my father's lands, where his hands were adorned with blisters. My son's palms are smooth. I take pride in the fact that I've given him a better life, even when he calls at midnight for his third DUI. My son's friend passed away, an overdose on oxycodone. We didn't have these kinds of issues back home. Back home, my father handed me a pack of cigarettes at the age of 9 and said, "Go to work." My son gives away his cigarettes for free. Sometimes at night, we couldn't sleep. The missile and gunfire were too close for comfort. My son sleeps through his alarm. So that's just to highlight the drastic difference between what life was like in El Kush and what life is like for a Chaldean man here. This next piece is called Sounds That Trigger the Sounds of Their Triggers. While walking to the gas station, a muffler backfires and I duck. It reminds me of the streets in Karakush. Watching TV while children play outside, and one child screams so loud that I run in fear they were being kidnapped. They feared being graced by a hand, not a bullet. The other morning, I smashed my alarm in a panic, thinking it would give away my location. I cried after. On the 4th of July, my daughter buys me earplugs. I take NyQuil around 7 p.m. I scream at my children when they slam doors. I couldn't drive the rest of the way after hearing those 2 cars crashing. The sound wouldn't leave my mind, reminding me of the random car explosions back home. The other day, my wife broke a wine glass. I fell into a fetal position below the windows of our living room. Okay, I'm going to read one last piece and then we will open it up for questions and discussion. And this is actually the last poem of the book, which I purposely chose to end it this way. My grandmother immigrated to Detroit with cucumber seeds. Running through the field of crossfire, it feels like the ground is biting at our legs. Praising the fruit rather than the roots, dismissing the necessity of land, of the hands that till and maintain an identity of torture and beatings, broken bones, and the overwhelming present reality of protecting children and women from abductions. It's the fact that bruised fruit makes the date more sweet. So we turn up the sound of making sambusaka as the smell of missiles increase. If Iraq were a tree, then Chaldeans are its leaves. So that's how Kaldani ends. And yeah, I'd just like to thank you all again for listening to me. I know that 5 p.m. is like a really hard time, but I do appreciate you all for making it and getting here. And I want to open it up for any comments that you have about the book, maybe any questions that you would have about the book or anything that you've heard here today in the event. And yeah, I'm going to open it up and I'm ready.
I have a question. What do you hope for the Chaldean community in the United States?
Wow, that's a good question. I mean, ultimately, I hope for preservation, but also perseverance. I really hope that we don't lose sight of what makes us Chaldean. I hope we don't lose our language. I really hope we don't lose our culture, our traditions. I hope that we continue to cook and prep food the way that we have for all these years. So yeah, I think my biggest thing is making sure that when I say that I'm Chaldean, I can show it too.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Very nice. Very nice.
Thank you. And I'm just reading through the comments too, just to see if there's anything that I missed. So there is one here that says, do you plan to transcribe Kaldani into Chaldean? So no, I don't plan to transcribe this particular piece into Chaldean. However, I am working on poetry that is written specifically in Chaldean. And I say that because Chaldean is a very metaphorical language. And to translate from English to Chaldean, you would lose a lot of the meaning, right? In terms, and in the English language, there are phrases that we just don't use in the Chaldean language. And then in the Chaldean language, there's phrases that we just don't use in the English language that just wouldn't make as much sense outside of those two languages. So I like that Kaldani exists in English, and that in the future there will be poetry that exists specifically in Aramaic for those who do read Aramaic and Chaldean. And let's see.
Just a quick question. Yeah. But by the way, thanks a lot for your poetry. I guess, somewhat based off my own subjective experience. You think as part of these issues too, everyone kind of lives within their own tribe, especially say in the Iraqi region, right? Like, Kurds live in their own tribe, maybe Assyrians or Arabs, and you can even say that in North America, like we all kind of live in our own tribes. We don't like to listen to other people's stories. And you think this could be some of these issues? And would you ever collaborate with other peoples, say like a Kurd or maybe a Muslim Arab or whatever?
Oh, 100%. I am open to collaboration with those in the Middle East. It's not just Chaldean identity that needs to be documented. There are, like you said, Assyrians that are going through the same thing. There are Assyrians, there are Kurds, who this is all happening to in the Middle East. And it's very unstable in these certain areas right now, especially with not having a proper government in place. So yeah, 100% I'm open to collaborating. And it is, and I guess you could say very quickly, I mean, even Chaldean identity in itself, Chaldeans were living in different villages, but also within those villages were different subdivisions. And that's something that Father Michael Bezzi talks about in his book. And I have his video. This is a really old cassette that my parents have. But this video goes through basically what life is like in Telquepe, and he takes you to each village, and then he takes you to each subdivision, and he explains the area, and he shows it to you in the video, and kind of breaks down how these subdivisions were formed. So from what I remember is that the subdivisions go based off of families. So I guess the larger the family, then that would be the name of the subdivision. So certain people would live in like the Yeldu subdivision or the Mansour subdivision, but then those subdivisions were within Telquepe. And then there were other, subdivisions that were within El Kush. There was even a divide in the community, back in Iraq, where only people from Telquepe would marry Telquepe, and only people from El Kush would marry El Kush. And it was rare to hear about somebody from El Kush marrying into Telquepe. That doesn't really stick as much here in the US. And I think too, that's mainly because about just preserving Chaldean identity. It's like they're like, we might find somebody that's from Telquepe, but El Kush will do, like that's kind of like a mindset that is like, that was happening. But too, they started to become more open, right? Because once you get access to more knowledge and like the different ways that people are living, you begin to adapt and you begin to learn and you begin to take on those qualities. I think that Chaldeans have done a really good job assimilating, but also holding on to culture and identity in the US. But yes, if you know someone who wants to collaborate, send them my way, Adam.
No problem.
Yeah. So I do see a request. Someone wanted to hear a specific poem and they wanted a line to be translated. So I do want to fulfill that request for who sent it. And that particular poem is The Stations of the Cross. And this was, so the Stations of the Cross is done every Friday during Lent in the churches, and they go around and they say prayers for each station of when Christ was about to be crucified. And I went one day and I saw my cousin and he was there, and I wrote this poem after I left. A grandmother's seat in church is like reserved parking, like a station, a rest area. Her presence felt with subtle reminders like your first cousin sitting in the pews on the same side she sat. I'm thinking how she must be praying with you and him and bragging to all her friends in heaven. Bronit Nabil ubratit bahira ile psoloyed gawat eta. This means the son of Nabil and the daughter of Bahira are praying in church together. And knowing that the same force that led you here also called him, and together you recite their prayers in your mother's tongue. Words seep into roots, hydrating spirits that sprout from land where mathematics and astronomy began, and hear the chants of Mar Adde and Mar Thoma. This church survives because of martyrs. It survives because you and your cousin decided to come to church. So I hope whoever requested that enjoyed it. That is also one of my favorite poems from the book. Looks like we got some new messages. Let's see. The preservation of culture is very important to you, rightfully so. What would you say to those who frame Chaldean as a dead or dying language? Oh, wow. Yeah, so it's clearly not dead. I speak it with my mother every day. But I can see why it's labeled that way. I guess my best response to that would be like, I'm someone who doesn't give up hope. And I have a lot of hope that the Chaldean language will not die. I have a lot of hope that it will thrive on. And I say that because there are a lot of, we call them shamashas, but these are the deacons of our church, and women as well. But it started with the shamasha, but there are a lot of clergy in the church who are helping preserve language by teaching it. And it's not only being taught in the churches, it's also being offered through different school systems. So I believe it is U of D Jesuit. And that's where you can take the Aramaic language and learn how to read and write Chaldean. This book that I have behind me is the volume 2. So there's a volume 1. And so this is Chaldean language. So books like this are being written and being put out there so that not just Chaldeans are learning to read and write their language, but so that other cultures are able to learn to read and write the Chaldean language. And then being able to read ancient texts that are written in Aramaic, because you're able to learn the language here. So this particular one was written by Kheri Fomia and Sabri Auraha. So you can see their names there. And this is the Ishtar Gate. So this is a pretty famous image associated with Chaldean identity, the Ishtar Gates of Babylon. Let's see. And we just have some comments. I don't see any other questions. Are there any questions that I might have missed? If you want to throw them back into the chat.
And Anne, if you could post in the chat how we can get copies of your book if we're interested.
Oh, yes, because that was posted earlier and it doesn't stay there. So let me just repost that and then the link.
And then as you post that up, we got a question in from Adam of what do you think of the Pope's recent trip to Iraq?
I was very excited when I found out that the Pope was going to Iraq, because for me, it felt like a very full circle moment. A lot of people don't know that Christianity began in what is modern day Iraq. So to have the Pope finally come back was, especially at the time of everything that's happening, but it just felt full circle because with Chaldeans, we are Eastern Catholic, right? So while we are joined with the Church of the West, with the Roman Catholic Church, we do have our own separate prayers that we do during Mass. And to know that the figure that we look at as like the highest in our church has finally come to recognize us again. It's just hard to explain. It just gave us so much hope, so much power in knowing that we're being recognized by this larger entity in our very humble practice, right? And to have him there, especially if I'm not mistaken, he stood in the same spot that ISIS said if he showed up, they would behead him. So that was a very powerful moment for the church in itself and for the Chaldean church to know that we have that support and that it's actually there, that they see us and they know what's happening. And my hope is that a lot of rebuilding is now going to happen in Iraq so that maybe one day I could go back and see where my mother grew up, or where my grandmother grew up, or what's left of it, I guess. Just to make sure, did the link post in there?
I don't believe so.
Just try.
Check to make sure it's posting to everyone. Sometimes it gets set to direct message somebody.
Oh, okay. I see that now. I wonder how that happened. There we go.
There we go.
So that is the link where you can purchase Kaldani. And it's also, I think right now it's available on Kindle. If you want to read it on Kindle, I believe it's available if you have Kindle Plus. You could get it for free. And if you want the physical copy, if you have Prime, it takes 2 days. Without Prime, maybe 5 to 10. But this is how the book looks. So Yep, if you're interested in buying it, that's definitely where you can get it. I have some author's copies coming in the mail that I should have in the next couple of weeks. You can also purchase them from me directly as well.
And do you want to post up your email or preferred contact method if people want to contact you with any additional questions?
Absolutely. So here's my email. It's just ann.esshaki@gmail.com. And any questions, if you just want to follow up, if you just want to have conversation, I'm open to it. I would love to talk more about my practice, about my book, about Chaldean history, identity. And Adam, I could send some links your way about more of that Assyrian Chaldean divide that we were talking about earlier.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Or comments?
Yeah. I'll say this one came from Jessica. It says,
Great
thank
job.
you for doing this precious work. It's such a pleasure to learn more about the work you do in the Chaldean culture.
Oh, thank you.
I loved all the readings, Annie. They were fantastic.
Thank you, Nora. Nora is my amazing cousin who commented about the narrow stairs. She knows those stairs.
Well,
So,
thank
yeah.
you everybody for coming tonight. A big round of applause to you, Anne. Thank you for doing your first ever Zoom poetry reading here.
Yes, thank you for hosting it. I really appreciate it, especially being a lifelong Southfield resident.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed being able to do this on the Southfield Public Library platform. And I have an author's copy coming your way, and it will be signed.
And we will be adding it into the local authors collection.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone, for coming. Have a good night.